Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We have a pretty big group, so we're going to give everyone a minute or two to log on, and then we'll get started. Good afternoon, everyone. We are going to get started in just a minute. Thank you so much for joining us today. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Executive Investigations, Ensuring Leadership Accountability and Workplace Integrity. We're recording today's session and we'll share it with you following the webinar. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A function on your Zoom panel. Now, I'd like to hand it over to our moderator for today's session, HR Acuity's Chief People Officer, Rebecca Chotsky.
Thank you, Lexi, and I'm very happy to be moderating today's session. I am looking forward to this topic. I think that's why we have so many people joining. We had a lot of interest in this one. But before we get to today's hot topic, I'm going to run through a few slides to share a little bit about HR Acuity and what we do for those of you who may not be familiar, or perhaps it's your first time joining us for one of our webinars. So if it is, welcome, and we can go to the next slide. So, for those of you who may not know, HR Acuity is the thought leader in strategic employee relations, and we provide technology solutions that are purpose-built specifically for HR and ER practitioners and leaders and professionals. And we offer an array of support and an array of best practices and technologies to help you. So everything from anonymous reporting so that your employees feel that they can raise issues and concerns safely and without any worries. Um, Easy ways for managers to document things so that they can keep track of what's happening and then share that with HR when they need additional support. We have a great case management and investigations solution that helps practitioners ensure that they're following consistent processes, driving best practices, conducting investigations in a way that will result in the very best and the most consistent outcomes that they can achieve. And then we have analytics that ties the entire platform together to help professionals identify where they may have patterns that they need to be more proactive about, or what they need to highlight to leadership in terms of getting additional resources or making recommendations. So be sure to check us out. We can take you on a curiosity tour of our solutions if you're interested. In addition to our technology, we're obsessed with employee relations and with supporting this community. So we do a lot. And we offer our benchmark study that comes out annually. And it's about to be launched, or rather, it's about to be published again in just a couple of weeks. In fact, I think it's a little over a week. So be on the lookout for that. We're going to have a webinar to share insights from that. And we offer our Empower community as well. So that is something that everyone who's on this webinar today should join. It's free. It's an online community where you can get support from other HR and ER practitioners and professionals. You can ask questions. You can share what you're doing. There are job boards. There are very specific communities on just specific topics if you want to do a deep dive or ask something very specific on accommodations or labor relations, you name it. So do join. I know that Lexi will put the links to how to get involved in the chat. We also have a maturity model for employee relations so you can track where you are in your journey as an organization. Like, where are you? How can you take practical steps to get even better at what you're doing for your organization? So it's called the ERQ. So be sure to check that out on our website. And we offer our roundtable for global ER leaders to get together in person. It's happening in October in Boston. And it is the event that is not to be missed. It's unlike any other kind of event like this. The just the vibe there is so supportive and so insightful. You will learn so much and expand your network. So do get involved with that if you're interested as well. And Lexi is putting everything in the chat for you. So we can go to the next slide. So coming up, similar to this webinar, we have a couple of webinars coming up. So we have one that's in Empower itself. So it's hosted in our community. So definitely join the community and then join us actually tomorrow at this same time. And it is a member-led discussion around unions, and it's with our partner LRI Consulting. So you don't want to miss that. It's called Should We Say the U Word? So it's all about labor relations and navigating today's climate for union relationships, union avoidance. Whether you have unions or don't, it's for you. And then we have another one coming up, AI and HR, top 5 risks and opportunities. I know that one's going to be a hot topic because everyone is learning as fast as they can about how AI can enhance our work and make us better. And also, we want to avoid the risks. So do join that on June 12th. That is coming up very soon. Okay, so I'm very excited to share that for all of our webinars, for anyone who's attended, you know that we ask our speaker or our expert to select a nonprofit or a charity that's near and dear to their heart, and we will make a donation to thank everybody for attending today and to thank them for their perspective and their expertise. And so today's is the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, which is an organization that helps make evidence-based social and emotional learning an integral part of education from preschool through high school. I know that my boys have benefited from that, so I love this one. Thank you so much. And so without further ado, I believe it is time for me to introduce our speaker. So our speaker today is Chiedza Nziramasanga, and she is the owner and founder of Transformative Workplace Investigations. So very excited to have her with us. She'll be a great speaker on today's topic. This is an external investigations and consulting firm that's based in the Seattle area. And Chiedza works with organizations across all kinds of sectors, empowering them to integrate equity, transparency, and accountability into their workplace investigations, policies, and practices, and helps organizations enhance employee trust and credibility and engagement through this investigative process, enabling them to gather insights into their workplace issues. And she is drawing from a wealth of experience as a former plaintiff's side employment attorney. And so Chiedza brings a unique perspective to workplace dynamics. And she has years of advocating for clients in cases involving workplace discrimination, harassment, retaliation, and wage theft. So she's adept at navigating the complexities in today's work environment. And I know that she will be a great expert for us to learn from today. So Chiedza, thank you so much for sharing with our community. I know that we'll have lots of questions. Typically, I will jump in and ask the questions, but for everyone who's been on webinars before, today we're going to try and keep track of the questions that are coming in the chat and in the Q&A, and we will get to those at the end because there is so much juicy content that we want to make sure we cover.
All right. Thank you so much for that warm introduction, Rebecca. I'm excited to be here with you all. I'm not going to lie, the tech is skipping over my introduction slide. And so I'm just excited for us to be here to be talking about executive investigations and accountability in these executive investigations. As Rebecca shared, I am a workplace investigator and owner of my own firm, Transformative Workplace Investigations, where I work with organizations across sectors, helping them to navigate complex concerns such as executive investigations, as well as training HR and ER teams on how to navigate workplace issues and investigations. And so this topic is selfishly something that I wanted to talk about because it's something that's been coming up a lot in my own practice. And I know that when we share what we're going through, oftentimes others are going through it too. It helps us not to feel so alone. Sometimes we can share and learn things from one another and be able to move forward. And so with that, we can dive right into our agenda. Today we'll be discussing some of the unique dynamics that come up in executive investigations. And so, as you may be aware, executive level or senior level investigations come with their own challenges and complexities. And so we'll be discussing what those can look like. We'll also be diving into power and pressure. And so oftentimes with executive or senior level investigations, where we are either investigating or hearing concerns from senior level leaders, we need to navigate things like power dynamics or biases, confidentiality, interim measures, things like that. And so we'll be talking about how to navigate those issues when there's power and pressure at play. We'll talk about retaliation risks. Oftentimes people are either afraid to report or participate in investigations involving executives or senior leaders due to fear of retaliation. And so we'll be talking about how to spot subtle signs of retaliation in these types of investigations and what interim protections you may want to put in place when you are investigating an executive. And then lastly, we'll talk about mitigation strategies for managing the organizational impact from an executive or senior level investigation. And so sometimes there is the potential for organizational fallout, and we'll talk about strategies to mitigate that. So before we jump into the content, I just wanted to start with a poll for us. And the question is, what's the biggest challenge you have had or seen when investigating a senior level leader? Is it navigating internal pressure or policies? Is it ensuring fairness despite those power dynamics that might be in play? Has it been protecting confidentiality and trust, preventing or addressing retaliation, as we spoke about just a minute ago? There are oftentimes those concerns. Or is it staying consistent with past investigations? Sometimes there's pressure to do things a little bit differently when there's a senior leader involved. And so there may be challenges around staying consistent. I'd love to give folks just a few minutes or a minute here to answer the poll question. All right. It looks like the winner here is ensuring fairness despite power dynamics. And it looks like otherwise we're kind of across the board here with responses. And so that's great. Thank you for sharing that. It is a challenge to ensure fairness despite power dynamics. And we'll be talking about how to navigate each of these issues during today's webinar. So before we jump into all of that, I just like to ground us in a definition. What is it that we're talking about when we're talking about an executive investigation or a senior level investigation? Generally, what we're talking about is a workplace investigation that involves someone in the C-suite, a senior leader with organizational influence, someone with authority over others, or a high public profile, whether that's internally or externally in the community. The scope of these investigations generally involves, like I shared, someone in the C-suite, maybe a VP. Sometimes it can be a board member. And these types of investigations do come with their own challenges. And so oftentimes what we see is that while the investigative process or principles stay the same, we see that the stakes, the dynamic, and the required safeguards in these types of investigations are more complex. And so why are executive investigations different? As I shared, usually in these types of investigations, the stakes are higher. There are concerns often about reputational risk for the organization, right? Is there organizational exposure, whether that's internally, that can impact the culture of your organization, or externally, can that impact the investigation, impact the reputation of your organization? There's also legal exposure. Oftentimes, when there's a senior leader involved in an investigation, there may be the possibility for higher liability in those types of situations. Employee trust is always something that we deal with in all investigations, but particularly in senior level or executive investigations, we can see impacts to morale. We can see impacts to engagement or productivity, and this erosion of trust. And then lastly is leadership credibility or authority may be questioned. And so folks are looking to see how we handle investigations that involve senior leaders. And that can either lead to bolstering our credibility and our integrity within the organization, or it can lead to undermining our credibility. And so as investigators, it's important for us to remember that our job is really to bring that sense of neutrality to a high pressure situation and a high profile process without being swayed by those internal dynamics around status or influence. Now, these are some common scenarios that you may see and that I know I have dealt with in my own practice, such as a CEO being accused of harassment by a junior employee. I have dealt with cases where there have been allegations of a VP misusing funds or engaging in financial misconduct. Board members can sometimes be involved in these executive level investigations. And so I have seen situations where board members have been accused of engaging in retaliation. And then lastly, C-suite whistleblower allegations where a C-suite leader has allegedly retaliated against a reporter. And so in each of these cases, oftentimes what we're dealing with is some sort of public scrutiny, again, both internally and externally. There may be pressure from your board, from other senior leaders, from employees within the organization in relation to how the situation gets handled. And really what employees are looking for and others in the organization are looking for is signs of fairness, that the process is fair. So when we're dealing with senior leaders and executives, unfortunately, what we can often deal with is that influence, either directly or indirectly, based on power dynamics. And so we want to be sure that we are navigating power dynamics by recognizing first certain signs, such as employee hesitation. Oftentimes, employees are reluctant to report issues involving leadership due to that perceived power imbalance. There can be concerns about how that will impact their career, whether there may be retaliation or blowback. And so folks may be hesitant to come forward. We may also see leadership pressure. And so, as I spoke to before, we may see pressure from different sides of the organization. Other executive leaders or senior leaders in the organization may subtly or explicitly try to influence or direct the investigation outcomes. It can even come from the executive who is either the complainant or the respondent in an investigation. They may want to direct how the investigation goes. And so that's something to be mindful of. And then there may be witness fear. And so oftentimes what we see is that witnesses or those who have firsthand knowledge are often anxious about the potential consequences of providing testimony or information against executives or senior leaders. And so I know sometimes internally there may be policies related to the obligation to cooperate with an investigation that can help manage this witness fear. But oftentimes I have seen as an external investigator that there may be times where I have challenges getting witnesses to participate in the investigation. And it's always helpful to encourage folks that the information that they share really helps us to get the full context of the situation so that we can make fair and reasoned findings. But along with that, we want to make sure that when we're navigating power dynamics, that we have a protected process. And what I mean by that is that we really want to set expectations around confidentiality and information sharing. Oftentimes, when there's an investigation going on, people want to know what's happening. And we want to be able to protect the integrity of the process. And so it's important to know what for folks to know what can be shared. In my practice, I oftentimes share where I am in the process. I won't share details about what I have learned in my interviews. However, I'm willing to tell people I'm at the interviewing stage or I'm still interviewing folks. I am now looking at evidence or I'm drafting my report so that folks don't feel like they're left out of the loop. They know that things are moving forward. It's also important to protect the process by putting interim measures in place when appropriate. And so if you identify at the outset of an investigation that interim measures are appropriate, it's important to put those in place. Sometimes those issues or concerns may come up in the midst of an investigation. And whenever identified, it's important that we take those steps to protect the process. And so we'll be talking about interim measures in a few slides here. It's also important for us to use neutral language when we're navigating power dynamics. And so that means maintaining impartial communication throughout the investigation process. If possible, if you can avoid any use of titles or differential phrasing in your interviews or when you're communicating with participants, that's helpful to just show that we're being fair, we're being impartial, and we're neutral in investigating the situation. And then lastly is really wanting to be clear on participant rights during the investigation, particularly when power dynamics are at play. We want to make sure that we're communicating about non-retaliation in our admonitions at the outset of an investigation, letting folks know that policy and law protect them against retaliation. Letting folks know that they have the right to due process, right? They have the right to be heard and to share their side of the story or whatever information or experiences they have to share. And for the respondent in the investigation, if that's a senior leader or an employee, letting them know that they have a right to respond to the allegations against them. And then lastly, if you're in a union environment, letting folks know that they, depending on the context, have their right to union representation. In other contexts, it may be appropriate that someone has an attorney or other representation present. And so concerns about bias often come up in executive investigations. And as many folks shared at the outset in the poll, that fairness is an issue in navigating these types of concerns. And so we want to be able to recognize bias and manage it so that we can protect the integrity of our process. And so I think it's important for us to talk through some of the common types of bias that show up in executive investigations. The first of which is authority bias. And this is where you give undue weight to statements from higher status individuals. And so when you're dealing with an executive or a senior leader, you may take that executive's denial of the allegations at face value versus scrutinizing the complainant's version of events or their complaint. In order for us to be able to manage for this, it's important that we use the same evidentiary standard for all. And so we want to be able to give everybody an opportunity to be heard and then weigh the evidence and the credibility and use our credibility factors to be able to reach our findings. Another common type of bias that comes up in executive or senior level investigations is anchoring bias. And so that is where we rely too heavily on the first piece of information you receive, or we anchor in that first piece of information. An example of this is allowing an executive or an HR leader's initial framing of the concern or allegations to shape your view before you interview others in the process. What we want to do here is delay forming any conclusions. You really don't want to reach any conclusions before you've gathered all of the information, interviewed all of the witnesses, reviewed any documentation, and then, of course, again, weighing the credibility of those that evidence to make your findings. Priming bias is another one that often comes up, particularly in internal investigations. At times experience this as an internal investigator and still experience it in my practice now. And that's allowing early unofficial impressions to shape how you view a case. And so oftentimes you will have other leaders or HR leaders or others in the organization who want to provide you their unofficial impressions of the individual parties in the case, or they may want to form your opinions or impressions about the outcome or what took place. And so you may hear things like, this complainant is difficult, or this person has an agenda. And then you start to interpret their behavior through that lens. And so what I like to do is limit my exposure to informal comments or any type of reputational noise. This can be hard to do, but oftentimes I'm asking really for the facts only. I want to rely on the facts and the evidence. And so if it is someone who's handing over the case to me, I will ask them, if there was an intake, just for the information from the intake. I don't want to hear their impressions, so that I can go through the investigation and reach my own conclusions based on those facts and that evidence. The halo and horns effect is also a common one that comes up in these executive level or senior level investigations. That's letting a positive, known as the halo, or a negative, known as the horns trait, influence your entire view of a person. And so you may overlook misconduct because a executive has delivered strong business results, or you may be encouraged to overlook misconduct because the executive has delivered strong results, and that's the halo effect. Or it may be assuming guilt based on unrelated leadership complaints. And so this may be a leader who's been complained about before, and you may assume that they're guilty based on those past complaints. The tip here is that we really want to judge each situation on its own facts. It's important for us to remember, and sometimes this can be hard to do, that past performance doesn't always dictate present behavior. And so when we're dealing with executives and senior leaders, we want to just be mindful of that halo and horns effect. And lastly, we often see attribution bias, and this is where we attribute others' behavior to their character instead of the situation. And so this can be assuming a complainant is overreacting and then labeling them as dramatic or emotional, rather than recognizing the emotional toll that may come along with reporting a person who's in a position of authority, like a senior leader or executive. The same can go for if the executive is the complainant or respondent. We want to consider external pressures, trauma, or fear when interpreting participant behavior. And so when we're thinking about bias in general, it's really important for us to slow down our decision making. We don't want to jump to any early conclusions. As I shared before, we want to make sure that we are taking the opportunity to gather all of the available evidence. We may think about using things like fact matrices, tools that help us to ground ourselves in the facts and evidence of the case versus these external pressures or these external impressions. We may also use standardized questions in our interviews. And so that can look like with witnesses using a set of questions. And then, you don't want to be scripted, but you do want to be sometimes when bias is at play, you do want to be consistent in the questions that you're asking your witnesses. And then consider bringing in peer reviewers if there are concerns about bias, or an external investigator if there are serious concerns of bias. Now, bias can be real or perceived, and I think that this is important and does come up particularly in these executive level investigations. Real bias is conscious or unconscious bias that has a measurable influence on judgment. And so at times, if you're working internally, you may be supporting departments or teams or specific managers or leaders, and that may cause you to have an unconscious bias or affinity for those individuals that impacts your judgment in the case. And so you want to be mindful of that. Perceived bias is where the parties or participants believe that you cannot be partial in the investigation, right? And so even if you believe that you're being objective, you may have dealt with prior investigations involving the same participants, and they may not have viewed the prior outcome favorably, right? And so there's this perception of bias. This matters because both of these types of bias, both real and perceived, damage trust, and it does influence employee confidence in the investigation and legal risk. And so you want to be thinking about ways to mitigate that, and we'll talk about that in the slide to come. Conflicts of interest can also show up in internal investigations. They can also show up externally if you've handled an investigation for a same organization on multiple occasions. Some examples of this internally are investigating within your reporting line. If there's an opportunity for you to pass an investigation onto a colleague or bring someone in to assist when an investigation involves a senior leader within your reporting line, you may want to consider doing that. As I spoke to before, previous working relationships with the parties. Maybe you have worked with or support those managers, leaders, teams that may present a conflict of interest. And then also strong personal opinions about a party. And so if, for example, you've investigated a case involving the same participants or leaders before, you may have opinions that you've formed about those individuals that may pose a conflict of interest. And this can lead to risks and challenges to the credibility of your investigation. Questions about partiality, like we talked about, there's that perception of bias. It can lead to reputational harm, both internally and externally, and then again, legal challenges. And so we want to be thinking about ways to mitigate that. Disclosing potential conflicts early. If you think that there may be a conflict, that's an opportunity for you to consult with either your colleagues, your leadership, legal, or compliance to discuss whether there is a potential conflict of interest issue. If appropriate and available to you, you may decide to recuse yourself from the investigation if, for example, there is a conflict of interest or you believe that you can't be fair and impartial in the investigation. Using peer reviewers I've spoke about, or co-investigators is another opportunity, or third-party investigators if there is a conflict of interest. And to the extent that you are in a situation where you are on your own, it's really important for you to just document the steps that you took to be objective. And so documenting every step of the investigation is really important so that you can point to that documentation and how you were able to maintain objectivity despite some of these other factors that might be at play. Rumors and misinformation often get spread in investigations involving senior leaders, and this can be a challenge to manage. Some of those challenges include that more stakeholders feel that they're entitled to information, right? You may be getting questions from other leaders or employees it could be coming from eight other HR leaders in the organization. And so you want to just be sure that you're managing for that to protect the integrity of your process. Suspicions often come up when we are engaged in senior leader investigations. And so those can be challenges to confidentiality as well. And then, as I spoke about internal rumors, sometimes media gets involved, and it can be really a challenge to manage those things. Some of the things that we can do to mitigate or protect our process and keep things confidential to the extent possible is to share information on a need to know basis, right? We only want to include the stakeholders that really need to know certain pieces of information. Oftentimes, as I shared, I will share where I'm at in a process. I generally don't share any findings or information about what I have learned during the investigation. I will share that in my report or during a oral report. It's important for us to provide consistent information to parties and limit the information that's shared to stakeholders. And that's also a way to be strategic in our communication. When you're doing this, and if you get pushback, it's just important for us to ground this in our policies and that we are working to protect the integrity of the process so that we can reach fair findings, right? We want to be able to protect the people and the process and reach a well-reasoned conclusion based on the evidence. So in executive investigations, our credibility really does hinge on maintaining consistency in our process. And so oftentimes there may be pressure for us to change the process or handle things informally or in a way that is inconsistent with our typical investigation process. But we really want to ensure that we are using equitable treatment for all participants involved in the investigation. You want to use the same process every time. You want to document any deviations from that process. And so people may be looking out for inconsistencies. We want to have a clear rationale. If we do deviate from our policy or our practice in investigations when investigating a executive or senior leader, you want to make sure that you're documenting why. And then we want to demonstrate accountability, right? And that's treating all participants with the same standards. We want to give them due process. Why this matters, as we've spoken about before, unequal treatment does damage trust. And so we want to be able to maintain trust in our process. Inconsistencies lead to legal risk. And so if an executive leader feels that they're being treated unfairly in a process, or if employees feel that the leader is being treated differently in the process, that can lead to legal risks about bias in the process or discrimination. And so we really want to be aware of that. And then again, accountability. Employees and leaders are watching to see how we handle the case and that we're handling it fairly and in line with our process. And so you want to be mindful of that. Now, pressure often comes up in these executive level investigations, and that can be subtle, it can be overt, sometimes it's unintentional, but you might hear things like, we need to wrap this up quickly, or we need to investigate this fast, or there may be pushes for handling it informally, as I shared before. And so people may be saying things like, are we really going to investigate this issue? It's really important for us to hold our ground, anchor in your policy and practices. And so, it's important for us to be saying to folks, when concerns are raised, we take them seriously, we investigate them, and that's rooted in your policy and your practices. It's important to keep clear and timely documentation. And so sometimes when folks are coming forward to report a senior leader or they are a participant in sharing a concern about a senior leader, they may do so under the guise of it being informal. And I just wanted you to know. It's important to get clarity and document when those concerns come forward. Get clarity from them about their concern and also document that concern. And if there's a formal process for making a complaint, provide them those channels so that if they do want to make a formal complaint, they have been given direction on how to do so. And then lastly, elevating any concerns to legal or compliance when needed to be able to document any concerns about internal pressure or interference in your process. So I want to get us into a case study, and this case study involves Derek, a employee relations investigator, and he is working with Maya, a senior HR business partner, and the scenario involves leadership pressure for a quick resolution. And so let's take a look at the interaction between Derek and Maya.
Hey, do you have a minute to chat about the ongoing investigation?
Of course, I just came from the leadership huddle. They're anxious about the situation.
I anticipated that. We're still in the early stages, and I won't rush the analysis.
But the individual involved is leading a high-profile project. The exec team is getting questions and they're feeling the heat.
Handling it quietly doesn't mean skipping essential steps. The complainant deserves a thorough process.
I understand, but the longer this goes on, the more complicated it can become.
I've seen what happens when the process is compromised. Rushing this could harm trust within the organization.
All right, I'll communicate that it's in progress, but not on the timeline they want.
Thanks for that. I'll keep you updated, but protecting the process and people is my priority.
Understood. Let's ensure we stay aligned as this progresses.
All right. So in reflecting on that case study, what we see is that leadership wants a quick resolution to protect a high-profile project. Some of the pressure types that we see Derek deal with in his interaction with Maya is leadership urgency, right? And so we see that this person is being investigated is leading this project. And so people want the investigation to move quickly. The execs are getting questions and they're feeling the heat, right? And so they are wanting this to move forward quickly. We see issues around the timeline and pressure around the timeline, right? We hear Maya say she'll let them know that it's in progress, but not on the timeline that they want. And then we see minimization. And so she shares the longer this goes on, the more complicated it gets. And so there's some of that subtle pressure to kind of minimize things or maybe skip steps. What we see Derek do right in this situation is to establish clear boundaries, right? And so Derek draws a clear line between operational needs and his ethical obligations. He shares that he's not willing to rush the analysis. He's going to move forward with his process. He uses some strategic professional pushback, right? He resists any pressure to expedite or downplay the process. He expresses to Maya that he's seen what happens when a process gets rushed, and that can compromise trust. And so he's not willing to do that. He stands in his unwavering commitment to fairness. And so he acknowledges that the complainant deserves a fair and thorough investigation. And that's really important. And then he preserves the process integrity, right? He safeguards the credibility of his investigation by refusing to skip any steps. And so as we're thinking about ways to handle pressure or interference in our investigations, we want to think about some of these strategies. Now, people often do have a heightened sense of fear when they are reporting a person in a position of power, such as an executive or senior leader. And they also have these same concerns when they are asked to be witnesses in an investigation. And so we want to be aware of the risks. I do see a hand raised, and I do want to share that we're going to have an opportunity for questions at the end. And so I'm happy if you'll hold your question or pop it in the chat. I will make sure to stay on it and answer any questions at the end. Thank you. The risks that can come up around people coming forward or participating are potential retaliation, right? Formal or informal retaliation. There can be impacts to career. There could be social harm such as isolation or exclusion. And so we want to be on the lookout for some of those things that may come up. We also want to make sure that we're putting safeguards in place. And so some of that looks like communicating non-retaliation protections early. I like to do it in my admonitions when I'm meeting with folks for the first time for an interview. I share with them right away that they are protected from retaliation both by policy and law. And that a lot of times puts folks at ease. I let them know they can reach out if they have concerns about that, so that I can direct them to the appropriate channel for addressing those concerns. Check-ins are also important. And so we want to make sure that we're having regular check-ins with participants, or at least monitoring the workplace for potential retaliation. Sometimes folks will not always come forward if they're experiencing something in the midst of an investigation. And so just checking in to see how things are going. In the midst of an investigation, we may uncover things that we were not aware of, such as retaliation. And then having feedback channels, whether that's during the investigation, letting folks know who they can reach out to if they have concerns, or post-investigation, having those feedback channels so that you can continue to monitor any concerns and protect those that come forward or participate in an investigation. Retaliation can be covert. And so it can be overt as well, but it can be covert and hard to spot. And so particularly when senior leaders are involved, some of these things can go under the radar. It doesn't always look like punishment. Sometimes it looks like distancing themselves or exclusion or restructuring the department or team. And so you want to be on the lookout for that. And sometimes it's even well-meaning, right? An executive is either a complainant or a respondent in an investigation, and they are distancing themselves as a result of that. And so we just want to make sure that they are aware of that and the perception as we move through the investigation. But retaliation can oftentimes look like things like career roadblocks, right? Blocking promotions or advancement opportunities when someone has either brought forward a complaint or is a participant in a complaint. And so looking at, whether there are issues about promotions or advancements either during the investigation or post-investigation are things that you should be aware of. Social isolation is one that often comes up, right? Excluding employees from meetings and interactions. It can be job role changes, reassigning to less desirable responsibilities, positions, or job locations. Oftentimes we see excessive monitoring. And so for individuals who either report or maybe are participants in an investigation involving a senior leader as the respondent, oftentimes they are subjected to heightened scrutiny of their work or their performance. And so you want to be on the lookout for that. And then there can also be reputational damage, such as spreading rumors or undermining a participant's credibility based on their participation in the investigation or bringing forward a complaint. Retaliation, I think it's really important for folks to know, doesn't require malicious intent. Even as I shared just before, even well-meaning managers can take actions that look retaliatory if they're not careful. And so the perception really does matter as much as the intent in these types of investigations. And so I want to take a look again at our case study. Derek checks in with the complainant, Renee, who is the direct report. She believes she's experiencing retaliation, and Daniel is our senior executive under investigation.
Thanks for meeting with me. I wanted to check in and see how things have been for you since we last spoke.
It's been different. Since I filed the complaint, I've noticed some changes. Daniel pulled me from a project I've led for almost a year, with no explanation.
I appreciate you sharing that. Changes like these can be stressful, and even if they weren't intended as retaliation, they can still feel that way. Perception is important.
It feels like I'm being pushed out. No one has said anything directly, but it's like I've disappeared overnight.
I understand. Retaliation can manifest in subtle ways, like exclusion or changes to your role. It's crucial to recognize these patterns and address them.
I was starting to think that this is just how it goes when you speak up, especially against someone senior like Daniel.
It shouldn't be that way. I'll document your concerns and discuss them with HR to ensure no further changes happen until the investigation is complete.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. It's comforting to know someone is looking out for me.
I'll also send you a follow-up form. If anything shifts again, you can share it in a way that's comfortable for you.
Right. So in that scenario, we see Derek do a nice job of being responsive. He is proactive in checking in on Renee. He doesn't wait for her to bring forward a formal complaint. He checks in with her to see how she's doing. This makes her feel heard, right? It shows that he's taking things seriously, and he's taking her concern of retaliation seriously. At this point, he doesn't have any explicit proof, but he does express that he will take a look into those concerns and escalate them. And then he does say he'll, again, document and escalate those concerns. And so he shares that he's going to make sure that they are appropriately assessed and addressed so that they can move forward. Now, as I spoke about before, when there are concerns about retaliation or other forms of harm, we can't always wait until the end of the investigation to act. We may want to put in place interim measures at the outset of an investigation involving an executive or senior leader, or if we unsurface any concerns during the investigation. When interim measures are needed, we see that when there are risks of ongoing harm, right? If there are allegations about discrimination, harassment, retaliation, financial misconduct, those are opportunities for ongoing harm. And so we want to consider interim measures. As I said, risks of retaliation. If there are concerns that someone is being retaliated against or will be retaliated against, we want to put in place our interim measures. And then if there are any risks to the integrity of our evidence, right? If there are concerns that there might be tampering with witnesses or that there may be misinformation spread in the organization that damages the integrity of the information we're able to gather in our investigation, we want to be putting in place interim measures. Interim measures can look like role reassignment, right? Temporary reporting changes and restructuring lines of reporting. It can look oftentimes like administrative leave. And so that's pulling the parties, either the respondent or the complainant or both parties, out of the workplace on paid leave during the investigation. It can be no contact directives, and that is requiring no or limited interaction between the parties during the investigation, or communication modifications like a third-party intermediary, or I've seen email-only communication mandated during an investigation, or it can be schedule changes, so making sure that folks aren't working the same shifts or remote work options. It's really important to remember that we don't want any interim measures to be looked at as punitive, and so we want to avoid the appearance that they are a type of punishment. We really want to emphasize that they are to protect the people and the process, and that they are temporary during the investigation. Any actions that follow will be based on the outcome of the investigation. Even well-handled investigations can have an organizational impact, and so we want to prepare for that impact or potential fallout, things like morale issues, public attention internally or externally, or that erosion of trust. Our role as investigators is really to partner with our internal partners, whether that's our communications or legal team, around the messaging for an executive level investigation. Oftentimes people know what's going on, and so we want to make sure that we have messaging when we're approached for information. We want to debrief leadership on our findings and our outcomes, right? So that they have something to ground their next steps or action items post-investigation. And then at all times, we're wanting to reinforce our values and our standards in the investigation process. So I just want to close this out with, let's see how things end with Derek and Maya.
So, where did we land on the recent case?
The findings were substantiated. The investigation confirmed a pattern of behavior that violated our code of conduct.
Okay. What's the next move from here?
We're implementing a role separation. Daniel won't be returning to his position, and leadership is finalizing a public statement reaffirming our values.
And how will this impact the team?
That's our next focus. I'm collaborating with communications and organizational development to support culture repair for the impacted group.
I've heard mixed reactions. Some are shocked, while others expected this. I think they want to see how we follow through.
Absolutely. This isn't just about removing someone. It's about reinforcing that no one is above the standard.
Right. It's crucial for us to show visible accountability and work on quiet, steady repair.
Exactly. I appreciate your support on the rollout, and I'll ensure the leadership team stays aligned with our message.
Thanks for the update. Let's treat this as the start of rebuilding trust.
All right. So in this particular case with Derek and Maya, we see that there are substantiated findings. There is a role separation that is planned, and there's going to be a public statement of values. And then there is a plan for culture repair work, right? They end by saying, let's look at this as an opportunity to reestablish trust. When we are dealing with these types of high-profile investigations involving senior leaders or executives, whether the findings are substantiated or unsubstantiated, some of the things we want to look out for are that lingering impact. Fear, mistrust, silence across the team can come up. There's oftentimes social division, whether there's isolation or informal punishment. And there can be loss of credibility, either for the leader who was a participant in that investigation, or if folks felt the process was unfair, that there is loss in the credibility of the investigation process. And so we want to be mindful of that. I know we're getting on time, and I really do want to provide space for questions. And so I'm going to just rush through these finals. Should I rush through, or should we? I saw you there, Rebecca. We can hop to questions, but I know the slides will be shared out with folks. And so you'll have this information here. But I think, again, it's critical to look at culture repair, and lastly, to consider post-investigation repair. And so those are some of the things you'll want to be thinking about post-investigation. Our takeaways are here. Fairness is a non-negotiable. We want to make sure that we're grounded in a consistent process, checking for bias and conflicts of interest. Keep structure in your policy and procedure, or using tools to ground yourself, prioritizing protections. We talked about spotting retaliation and interim measures, and then demonstrating leadership accountability once the investigation is closed. We want to model transparency with outcomes and accountability if there are issues that are surfaced during the investigation. I do have a free resource that I did create for folks participating in this webinar, the Executive Investigations Playbook. It's some templates and tools to help you manage these types of investigations. You can scan the QR code or get it at the link. And then I encourage you to stay in contact. I share a lot of information and insights on workplace investigations, and I look forward to staying in touch. And with that, I will open it up to any last minute Q&A. I know folks probably have to run. You're on
Thank you
mute.
so much, Chiedza. That was so informative. I did want to mention that sometimes what we do is host a follow-up session in Empower so that people can have a more direct conversation with you on their specific questions. But I'll try to get through, I'll throw a couple of these your way.
Sure.
Anything, okay, so a couple related to the beginning when you're determining who's going to be involved in the investigation. So, would you ever allow an attorney representative to be present if it's an internal company investigation? Is the first one.
Sure. Yeah. If there are, usually if an attorney is asked to be a representative as an internal, that was not something that we denied to complainants. If there were concerns about liability, for example, a discrimination, retaliation, harassment claim, something that might implicate some kind of legal liability, that was something that we did allow for folks.
Okay, great. And then somebody had a question. You, as an outside investigator, how do you handle situations where complainants or witnesses are concerned about your impartiality because the company hired you? And so the assumption could be that even you outside wouldn't be impartial because you're ultimately, it's the executive that you're reporting to in this situation. So what do you do if you find that that contributes to reluctance to
Sure.
participate?
Yeah, what I like to do is just share with folks my role. My role is really to be a third party neutral. I'm not a part of the organization. While I do provide a report to the organization, it's to provide the organization with information about what happened. And so they have something to ground their next steps. And so I'm often helping to just share with folks that that's my role in the process. I don't really have any horse in the race. I am just there to be able to gather the information so that I can relay that back to the organization.
And I know that we are at time, but thank you so much. And I do think we have enough kind of curiosity on this topic that we should potentially do a follow-up if you're available in an
Sure,
hour.
I'd be happy to.
And it, it may only be 30 minutes. And so, who knows, like there might be a lot of good questions
Yeah, I'd
generated.
be happy
So
to have a more open discussion now that we've gotten through the
yeah,
content part.
I think
So
that
I
that would
look
be a
forward
great
to that.
follow-up. So I see people are in support of that. So thank you
All
everyone for
right.
joining us and thank you for your expertise, Chiedza. It was
Thank
really,
you.
really great.
Thank you so much. We'll talk
See you
soon.
next time.